million guns in the United States, which is more than the population.
The problem here is Trump has been able to make the argument that this is a political prosecution and that he's being singled out unfairly.
Defend our nation.
You are saying we could have a cure for cancer.
We'll have treatments for many cancers in this decade, and they're going to come from India.
Downside is that it could potentially wipe us out. But let's start with the upside first.
The upsides are absolutely enormous. The potential uses of this are almost unlimited.
I only discovered AutoGPTs about a week ago and started writing about them. And after I started writing about them, Jeff Bezos followed me on Twitter, and all kinds of crazy amounts of people have been contacting us.
The show where we get you the week's biggest stories from around this world. What is the India story? It's the story of the world's biggest democracy.
We are developing the road infrastructure. In the end of 24, it will be equivalent to the road infrastructure of USA.
We have now entered the growth phase. And I believe that the growth rate in India is going to be exponential.
Two narratives of Indian story which need to be brought center stage.
Every week, the India story will bring the most incisive analysis, the most authoritative voices.
India will be a significant pole in the universe of AI going forward.
India is walking tall, India's stature is different, India's voice is being heard.
And
hello and welcome. Good morning, Asia. Good evening, America. You're watching World DNA. My name is Mohammed Saleh. And the special edition of this broadcast will be getting you the latest in terms of what is happening at this moment in the Gaza crisis. And the United States of America has yet again vetoed a United Nations Security Council resolution that would have brought about an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, where the Palestinians at this moment are still being subjected to heavy bombings by the Israelis. I will be getting you all this and much more in this show, but first let's take a look as to what is making headlines at this hour. Now, there is no end to the campaign of Israeli bombings and the ground offensive in the Gaza Strip, as the United States has vetoed a draft UNSC resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip that was pushed forth by the United Arab Emirates. In a pretty big development in the United Kingdom's COVID inquiry, a new diary extract claims that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak back then had argued to quote-unquote, let the coronavirus rip a bit. The Russian President Vladimir Putin announces that he'll seek re-election in 2024 for his third consecutive term and sixth overall term as the President of Russia. And a historic move, the European Union has agreed to the world's first comprehensive laws to regulate artificial intelligence after a 37-hour marathon negotiation. An American-based intelligence company has ranked the Indian Prime Minister as the most popular leader anywhere on planet Earth, with 76% of the respondents approving of his style of leadership. And also in a major development in the sporting world, the International Olympic Committee has now given a green signal to Russian and Belarusian athletes to compete in the 2024 Paris Games as neutrals. All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking at this hour. And this, of course, has got to do with the Israel-Gaza war. And the United States has yet again become the only nation to have vetoed a United Nations Security Council resolution that called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. While doing so, the United States reasoned that this draft resolution of the UNSC that was tabled was divorced from reality, as the Americans saw it, and it would have only helped Hamas. The resolution was in fact introduced after the UNSC Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, had invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter to bring the issue to the immediate attention of the Security Council. He said that the world's eyes are on the UNSC and the history's eyes are on the UNSC to see as to how it would act. Now, despite the US's increasing pressure on Israel to do more to protect Palestinian civilians at this moment, the United States has become the only nation at the UNSC that has again vetoed a resolution calling for a ceasefire. Now, another nation that has been backing the Israeli war in the Gaza Strip, the United Kingdom, which also has a veto, chose to abstain from voting. On the other hand, there are reports that have claimed that the Biden administration has imposed restrictions on the Palestinian foreign minister, limiting his ability to engage with the media. And this is according to the Saudi foreign minister. However, the U.S. State Department spokesperson has denied of any such restrictions being imposed. A delegation made up of officials from Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and the Palestinian Authority were in Washington on Friday and also met with the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in a vain effort to press the Biden administration to drop its opposition to a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. With the failed diplomatic efforts, the intense fighting continues in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli army has said that it has struck more than 450 targets in Gaza from land, sea and air in a span of less than 24 hours, which makes it the heaviest campaign of bombing that has been witnessed in the Gaza Strip by the Israelis ever since the military pause ended. And this video, which is said to be a body cam footage of one of the Israeli soldiers, shows the Israeli troops carrying out their operations inside of what is a school in the Shajaya neighborhood of the Gaza city in the northern part of Gaza. And these are images from central Gaza. And here, an Israeli bomb dropped from the sky on a residential building resulted in deaths of at least about 20 Palestinian civilians. Now, the medics were seen carrying an injured baby and a young woman, amongst others, to the hospitals in the aftermath. And there were 20 bodies that were pulled out from underneath the rubble, killed due to this Israeli campaign of bombing. And Israel has carried on with its expanding offensive on the ground in the southern part of Gaza. Now, there was heavy Israeli bombardment that was reported over the city of Khan Yunis, and the Israeli army says that its forces are fighting house to house and shaft to shaft in reference to tunnel warfare that's at this moment happening, although the Israelis have also said that they're using technology rather than get inside the tunnels to fight with Hamas directly in close combat. They've also released a video showing the Israeli soldiers on the ground and the body cam footage of the troops entering from one building to another. And this has been the situation in Rafah, in southern part of Gaza. Ambulances were seen rushing to the scene of an Israeli air bombing that has continued to affect the city very badly. And there were also reports of certain rockets being fired from the Gaza Strip towards Israel as well. There were a few rockets that reportedly were launched from the Gaza Strip, which resulted in many of the Israelis running for cover in different parts of Israel. And these are images from Tel Aviv that show the Israeli Iron Dome intercepting some of these crude rockets that are fired by Hamas. And also these are videos that have been put out by Hamas as well of fighting the Israeli ground forces in close combat. Now, many of these videos show the Hamas fighters taking on the Israeli tanks and other armored vehicles, where the Hamas fighters are using these crude rocket-propelled grenades to puncture the Israeli armor. And Hamas has been putting out videos such as this, and this particular video shows one of the Hamas fighters jumping up in joy after having destroyed one of the Israeli tanks in close combat. Hamas, meanwhile, has condemned those chilling images of the Palestinians having been dragged out from their homes, stripped virtually to their underwear and being paraded through the streets of Gaza. Now, Hamas has described this as a heinous crime against innocent Palestinian civilians, while Israel claims that its military will continue to make more such sweeping arrests in the Gaza Strip in the days to come to determine who is a Palestinian fighter and who is not affiliated to organizations such as Hamas. On the other hand, the people in Gaza are going through a humanitarian crisis. There is an extreme shortage of food, fuel, water and medicines. Now, the World Food Programme's Deputy Executive Director visited the enclave on Friday. The organization distributed some amount of food supplies, but this has been dubbed as a drop in the ocean because the 2.3 million Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip for over 60 days have been denied access to food, water, medicine and other essential supplies. Now, according to the United Nations, nearly about 80% of the Gazan population has been uprooted from its homes and has been displaced. And these Palestinians are now struggling to even find water to drink and to meet their other basic necessities of life.
About half of the population in Gaza are starving, the needs that we are meeting is really nothing. The humanitarian operation is collapsing. With the chaos, with this active fighting, it's not possible to do the work that is needed to meet these massive needs. And so we need supplies at a completely different scale.
Meanwhile, the United States has vetoed yet another UNSC resolution that would have called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Israel has, of course, praised Washington's veto for the resolution. An American envoy said that the resolution was in fact divorced from reality as the Americans saw it. He also attacked the resolution sponsors, criticizing them for rushing it through and leaving the call for an unconditional ceasefire unchanged.
It reiterates the Council's demand that all parties comply.
The United States engaged in good faith on this text. We propose language with an eye toward a constructive resolution that would have reinforced the life-saving diplomacy we have undertaken since October 7, increased opportunities for humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, encouraged the release of hostages and the resumption of humanitarian pauses, and laid a foundation for a durable peace.
Now, the United States and Israel, remember, oppose a ceasefire because they claim that this would only benefit Hamas. Now, Washington supports pauses in fighting to protect civilians and to allow the release of hostages taken by Hamas. Now, the U.S. has offered some substantial amendments to the draft, including a condemnation of the attack that took place on the 7th of October. Meanwhile, 13 other members of the UNSC voted in favor of the brief draft resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire that was put forward by the United Arab Emirates. And what is interesting is that Britain abstained from the vote. Britain's UN ambassador has said that the country abstained because there was no condemnation of Hamas. And 4 draft resolutions had already been rejected in the weeks following the 7th of October for lack of sufficient backing or because of American vetoes which have opposed the humanitarian ceasefire there. And our correspondent Susan Tehrani has sent us this report. Listen in.
During a Security Council meeting here at the United Nations on Friday, the United States criticized what it termed a fraud resolution calling for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, saying that it's divorced from reality. Vetoing that resolution, notably because it failed to condemn Hamas for the October 7th attacks. Meanwhile, Riaz Mansour, who is the permanent observer of the state of Palestine at the United Nations, called America's veto a, quote, turning point in history, while Israel's ambassador to the UN thanked the United States and the Biden administration for this move. Now, this resolution and the failure to pass it comes just days after UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres invoked what is called Article 99 of the UN Charter. UN officials insist that it carries UN constitutional weight. However, it seems despite that call by the Secretary General and invoking this article, still the Security Council could not come up with a resolution. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
In what appeared to be the largest attack of its kind in recent memory, approximately 7 mortar rounds reportedly were fired at the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. And this is according to the U.S. military officials. The embassy attack also marks the very first time that it has been fired on in more than a year, apparently widening the range of the targets. In recent weeks, dozens of military bases housing U.S. forces have been attacked. Now, the United States has condemned the attacks and has called on Iraq to bring the perpetrators to justice. The U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller has said in a statement, and I quote, "The many Iran-aligned militias that operate in Iraq threaten the security and stability of our personnel and our partners in the region." Meanwhile, the Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammad Shia al-Sudani has warned that the attacks on the U.S. Embassy undermine the country's security. He also called on the security forces to bring those responsible to justice. The UN Assistance Mission for Iraq has condemned the attack and has warned of repercussions. They wrote on social media platform X, and I quote, "The UNAMI condemns this morning's rocket attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and all diplomatic premises must be protected in line with international law." Now, the attacks have come against a backdrop of more than 2 months of war between the U.S. ally Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Now, the United States leads an international coalition that seems to be battling the jihadists in Iraq and neighboring Syria, even though the Iraqi parliament had passed a resolution demanding that all American troops must leave immediately. Now, the American troops have been attacked at least 84 times since the 7th of October. The Pentagon has said that these attacks have left at least about 60 U.S. personnel wounded. The U.S. has responded with a series of air bombings that have resulted in at least 15 militants getting killed in Iraq and 7 others in Syria. And the United States has imposed more restrictions to import from 3 Chinese companies over forced labor practices involving Uyghur minority Muslims and other minorities in China. The latest edition brings the number of companies in the list to about 30. The companies face U.S. restrictions that produce anything from sugar to network transformers to yarn, and they'll be added to the U.S.'s Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act entity list. And this list restricts the import of goods tied to what the U.S. government has in fact characterized as an ongoing genocide of the Uyghur minorities in China's Xinjiang province. Now, the American officials believe that Chinese authorities used forced labor of these minority groups for producing the goods, and Beijing has denied any such abuses have taken place. The Chinese embassy has reacted to the latest move by the U.S. and has said that the action is quote-unquote based on lies. It's also said that Beijing will take some effective measures to firmly safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of the Chinese enterprises. So as arguments rage over the Partygate and also the handling of the COVID-19 crisis in the United Kingdom, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been blamed for asking the government to let the coronavirus rip a bit. And this is according to a new diary extract that's been disclosed to the COVID inquiry. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who was in fact back then was a Chancellor in the Boris Johnson's cabinet during the COVID, is now set to face an interrogation next week. And this comes after the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that the public's characterization of Partygate was far from the truth. The latest revelation has come on the heels of Rishi Sunak denying, saying that the government should in fact just let people die, rather than impose a second national lockdown, an allegation that's been denied by the leader. The latest excerpt has blamed the Prime Minister of telling the government to let the virus rip a bit. And the Prime Minister had earlier refuted the allegations that had surfaced in the previously released Dari note. Now, the notes in question were made by the Boris government's chief scientific advisor during COVID, Patrick Vallance. And the note is from a conversation between the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Finance Minister Rishi Sunak. Another extract from the same record has revealed that Rishi Sunak had also pushed for the immediate lifting of COVID restrictions and getting rid of all curbs. Now, earlier in the week, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was also interrogated after public anger erupted over the COVID lockdown breaching parties called the Partygate. The inquiry has heard evidence from advisers that fear the impact of the pandemic on the economy, and Boris Johnson did not allow for another lockdown. This in turn had caused the virus to spread uncontrollably, and the former Prime Minister is not required to testify any further, though he is asked for a new investigation into the matter. But the European Union has become the first continent to in fact set some clear rules for the use of artificial intelligence. Now, the agreement between the European Parliament and the EU member states has been described as historic, and the world's first comprehensive laws to regulate AI have been agreed in a landmark deal. Now, the agreement will govern artificial intelligence, social media and search engines, and this puts the EU ahead of the United States, China and the United Kingdom in the race to regulate artificial intelligence and to protect the public from risk. The legislators have agreed on a two-tier approach with transparency requirements for all general-purpose AI models, stronger requirements for powerful models with systemic impact across the EU. And amongst the new rules, legislators have also agreed to strict restrictions on the use of facial recognition technology, except for the narrowly defined law enforcement exceptions. The legislation also includes ban on the use of AI for social scoring, using metrics to establish and also upstanding someone is. The use of AI to exploit these vulnerabilities because of their age, disability or economic situation has also been banned. The companies that fail to comply with the rules will face fines of up to $7 million or 1.5% of their turnover. According to the European Commission's President Ursula von der Leyen, the AI rules will provide a unique legal framework to develop trustworthy technologies that do impinge on the safety and fundamental rights of people and businesses. According to sources, the deal does not have a final approval just yet, as it still needs to be voted on by the 27 other nations, and technical details still need to be finalized, so it's unclear when it will go for a vote. Now, the EU law will then become the blueprint for other governments and an alternative to the United States' light touch approach and China's interim rules. Meanwhile, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has yet again emerged as the most popular leader in the world, and this is according to a US-based consultancy firm Morning Consult, where the Indian Prime Minister has retained his popularity with an approval rating of 76%. Now, the Indian Prime Minister has been topping the list for the last few years, and according to the survey, 76% of the respondents have approved of his way of leadership. Meanwhile, only about 18% had disapproved of it, and 6% did not give any opinion. Now, the Indian Prime Minister's approval ratings are over 10 percentage points higher than the next top leader on the list. Second to the Indian Prime Minister, you have the Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who is trailing with an approval rating of 66%. The President of the Swiss Confederation, Alain Berset, has bagged the third spot with 58% approval ratings. While the Brazilian President, Lula da Silva, stands in the fourth position in the list, and the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has claimed the fifth spot. Now, US President Joe Biden has come eighth on the list, and the recently released list with 37 approval ratings. The latest ratings are all based on approval ratings that have been collected from the 29th of November till the 5th of December. Now, the approval ratings are based on a moving average of 7 days of adult residence in each country with varying sample sizes, and Prime Minister Modi had topped the list ahead of India's general elections scheduled to take place later in 2024. The Russians and the Belarusian athletes have been cleared to compete as neutrals at the 2024 Paris Olympics by the IOC. The games will not feature flags, emblems or anthems of the two countries. The athletes from Russia and Belarus have in fact faced some serious sanctions from several sporting bodies since Moscow launched its assault on Ukraine in February 2022. However, over the past year, a number of Olympic sports have also eased restrictions, allowing athletes from both countries to return to competition as neutrals. And now the IOC has confirmed that the athletes from two countries who have qualified through the existing criteria will compete at the Paris Games. However, they must still meet certain conditions. Now, athletes who actively support the war, as well as athletes who are contracted to the Russian or the Belarusian military, will not be allowed to participate. Additionally, the two countries remain banned from team sports, while no Russian and Belarusian officials will be allowed to attend. And this move is likely to draw a lot of reaction from Ukraine and its allies. Ukraine had earlier threatened to boycott the Games if a blanket ban on Russia and Belarus is not issued. And only about 8 Russian and 3 Belarusian athletes have qualified for the Games so far. Meanwhile, over 60 Ukrainians have sealed their berth at the Paris Games. Well, that's all the time we have in this edition of the broadcast. Stay tuned.
Israel woke up to a barrage of thousands of rockets fired from the Gaza Strip.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
Hostilities have broken out between Israel and Palestine, and the tensions that had been gathering steam over the course of the last several weeks and months.
The siren has gone off. I don't know if you can hear in the background what's going on. I'm going into the shelter now. So it's a very, very serious situation here across Israel. It's a state of emergency.
The United States stands with Israel.
Well, we are starting this broadcast with a developing story from West Asia, where Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says Hamas has launched a war against the state of Israel.
It's easy to tell you a flat story. It's easy to show you what's happening around the world. We do the difficult part.
This weapon has been banned, but the US, Ukraine and Russia do not find the bombs problematic.
We also tell you why what's happening.
New drug is making a difference in the fight against Alzheimer's. This medicine helps slow down a patient's cognitive decline.
We look beyond the text. We give you context.
Is China preparing for a war in the Himalayas? And tonight, we come to you with some proof.
Hypocrisy is stunning.
Do leaders mean what they say? Do they ever say what they mean? To find out how real news affects you, your decisions,
Just when Iran took one step in the right direction, its moral police is planning to drag it further back. And once again, the victim will be women.
Watch Gravitas.
Welcome and thanks for tuning in.
We don't impose our views.
Did India threaten to ban Twitter? Either that or Jack Dorsey is lying to you.
That is Gravitas. We let life breathe through our show. Gravitas, the informed show for an intelligent audience.
Hello, welcome to This World. Vladimir Amelyan joins us from Kiev, and he is currently on the front line fighting Russian troops.
We believe that the world should be ruled by democracies.
I was interviewing you on television a couple of weeks back.
That's right.
And you said, if you really want to understand Jerusalem, why don't you come here and see it?
And you came.
Here I am.
Mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting. Why this cannot be fixed?
There are 425 million guns in the United States, which is more than the population.
The problem here is Trump has been able to make the argument that this is a political prosecution and that he's being singled out unfairly.
Defend our nation. You are saying we could have a cure for cancer.
We'll have treatments for many cancers in this decade, and they're going to come from India.
Downside is that it could potentially wipe us out. But let's start with the upside first.
The upsides are absolutely enormous. The potential uses of this are almost unlimited.
I only discovered auto-GPTs about a week ago and started writing about them. And after I started writing about them, Jeff Bezos followed me on Twitter, and all kinds of crazy amounts of people have been contacting us.
The show very...
Hello and welcome. You're watching WION World is One. My name is Mohammed Saleh, and let's start this broadcast by taking a quick look at what's making headlines at this hour. Now, there is no end to the Israel-Hamas war in sight, as the United States has yet again vetoed a draft resolution at the UNSC that called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. In a big development in the United Kingdom's COVID inquiry, a new diary extractors claimed that Rishi Sunak had argued to quote-unquote, let the virus rip a bit. Russian President Vladimir Putin announces that he'll be running for election again in 2024 for his third consecutive bid as the president and the sixth overall term as the president of Russia. And a bit of a historic move, the European Union has agreed to the world's first comprehensive law to regulate artificial intelligence after 37-hour-long marathon negotiations. And the US-based intelligence company ranks India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi as the most popular leader anywhere in the world, with 76% of the respondents approving his style of leadership. And the major development in the sporting world, the International Olympic Committee has given the green signal to the Russian and the Belarusian athletes to compete in the 2024 Paris Games as neutrals. So the United States has yet again vetoed a UN Security Council resolution that called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. And Israel, as expected, has praised Washington's veto. An American envoy said that this draft resolution was divorced from reality as America saw it. He also attacked the resolution sponsors and criticized them for rushing it through and leaving the call for an unconditional ceasefire to be unchanged. Listen.
The United States engaged in good faith on this text. We propose language with an eye toward a constructive resolution that would have reinforced the life-saving diplomacy we have undertaken since October 7, increased opportunities for humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, encouraged the release of hostages, and the resumption of humanitarian pauses, and laid a foundation for a durable peace.
But the United States and Israel have said that a ceasefire at this moment would only benefit Hamas, despite the humanitarian catastrophe that is underway in the Gaza Strip. Now, what is interesting to note is that the Americans have also offered substantial amendments to the draft of the resolution, including a condemnation of the 7th of October attacks that took place. While 13 other members of the UNSC, in fact, voted in favor of the draft resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Now, this draft resolution was put forth by the United Arab Emirates, while Britain, another strong backer of Israel, chose to abstain from voting. Britain's United Nations ambassador said that the country had abstained because there was no condemnation of Hamas. The 4 draft resolutions asking for a ceasefire have been rejected in the weeks following the 7th of October for lack of sufficient backing or because of American vetoes that have opposed a ceasefire. Now, the presidents of Harvard, MIT and also the University of Pennsylvania are facing intense scrutiny for their testimony at the White House hearing on anti-Semitism on America's university campuses. David Volpe, a rabbi and a visiting scholar at the Harvard Divinity School, resigned from the Harvard University's Anti-Semitism Advisory Committee, or what he dubbed as inadequate testimony on these incidents. Now, in a long post on social media platform X, Volpe attributed his resignation to the painfully inadequate testimony of President Claudine Gay at a congressional hearing this week. Now, Volpe further added that even though Harvard is a very valuable and a very reputed institution with some very extraordinary minds, the system and ideologies grip far too many students. He was actually criticizing the student protests against the Israeli war. And he also went on to state that portraying Jews as intrinsically evil is itself evil. In a message to Harvard students, Volpe motivated the students to build institutions that they value and not merely attack those that they denigrate. Now, Volpe's resignation has sparked some serious concerns about student well-being and also a surge in youth activism on campus. So he was opposing youth activism on campus. The earlier testimonies of the presidents from the leading American universities has sparked widespread criticism. When New York Republican representative asked directly if calling for genocide is against universities' code of conduct, all 3 presidents had said that the answer was pretty complicated and depended on the context. Listen in.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The answer is yes. And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
Harvard has also released a follow-up statement stating that Harvard condemns calls of violence and has added that anyone trying to threaten students on campus would be held accountable. However, Harvard isn't the only school that is experiencing the consequences. Ross Stevens, the founder and the CEO of Stone Ridge Asset Management, has said that the University of Pennsylvania could end up losing $100 million in terms of funds if its president, Elizabeth McGill, does not immediately step down. Billionaire Bill Ackman has also called on all 3 university presidents to resign in disgrace. Meanwhile, a group claiming to represent Jewish students has said that they paid for a plane to fly over Harvard University's campus in Cambridge. It was trailed by a banner following a Palestinian flag with a statement, and this is what, of course, was put out on the skies over Harvard. Since arguments rage over the Partygate and also the handling of the COVID-19 crisis in the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been blamed for asking the government to let the virus, quote-unquote, rip a bit. And this is according to a new diary extract that's been disclosed to the COVID inquiry. The Prime Minister Sunak, who was a Chancellor in the Boris Johnson's cabinet during the COVID-19 is now set to face interrogation next week. And this comes after the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that the public's characterization of the Partygate was far from the truth. The latest revelation has come on the heels of Rishi Sunak denying having said that the government should let people die rather than impose a second national lockdown, an allegation that's also been denied by the leader. The latest excerpt has blamed the Prime Minister of telling the government to let the virus rip a bit. The Prime Minister had earlier refuted the allegation that surfaced in the previously released diary note. The notes in question were made by the Boris Johnson government's chief scientific advisor during COVID, Patrick Vallance. The note is from a conversation between the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Finance Minister Rishi Sunak. Now, another extract from the same record has also revealed that Rishi Sunak had pushed for the immediate lifting of COVID restrictions and getting rid of all curbs. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was also interrogated this week after public anger erupted over the COVID lockdown breaching parties called the Partygate. The inquiry has heard evidence from advisers that, fearing the impact of the pandemic on the economy, Boris Johnson did not allow for another lockdown. And this, in turn, had resulted in the virus spreading uncontrollably. The former Prime Minister is not required to testify any further, though he has asked for a new investigation into the matter. During COVID, the United Kingdom faced its biggest health crisis in decades. The country saw one of Europe's longest and strictest lockdowns, as well as one of the highest death tolls across the continent. And according to data, the COVID-19 infections killed more than 200,000 people in Britain and infected millions of others. The credibility of Western sanctions on Russian oil has come into the spotlight. Russian oil exports have in fact returned to pre-war levels, generating a staggering $11 billion of profit.